Hello, I'm Tracy Edwards, and I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino-Sunnyvale, and I want to welcome you all today to a forum on CUSD's Measure A. First, a little bit about the League of Women Voters. So the League of Women Voters have been empowering voters and defending democracy for over 100 years. We were founded in February of 1920, just 6 months before women won the right to vote through the passage of the 19th Amendment. The League never supports political parties or candidates. It does study issues, it does develop position, and does advocate for the passage of law. But we do have two distinct corporations. One of them, Action and Advocacy, which does advocate for the passage of laws, and the other, which is Voter Service and Citizen Education. And that's the role we're in tonight, in educating citizens. Next slide, please. We have 6 terrific panelists: Polly Bove, Superintendent of Fremont Union; Lori Cunningham, Board Member of CUSD; Orrin Mahoney, former Mayor of the City of Cupertino; Phyllis Vogel, Board Member of CUSD; Hung Wei, current Council Member for the City of Cupertino and former Member of the Board of Fremont Union; and Stacy, Superintendent for Cupertino Union. Next. Before we get started, just a little bit on voting. This measure is on the ballot on May 4th, and you have 2 ways to return your ballot, either by mail or putting it in one of the drop boxes located around the county. I'll take a moment here and let you grab this screen if you'd like, and you can later go to that URL for Dropbox locations. You can also sign up for ballot tracking, so you know that your ballot was received and when your ballot was counted. Measure A. So what is the question on the ballot? It's pretty straightforward. Should the voters replace the current parcel tax, which was approved in May of 2014, with a new parcel tax at the rate of $398? That new parcel tax, if approved, would begin July 1st and run for the next 8 years, expiring on June 30th, 2019. So the bottom line, a yes vote means you're approving the ballot measure at $398. A no vote means you will not approve it and that the current parcel tax will continue at a rate of $250 and it will expire on June 30th, 2022. Because this is a tax, it will require a 2/3 vote to pass. Now, submitting questions. We've received a lot of questions in advance, and we have a lot of questions pulled together to begin with. But if you would like to submit a question, please enter it in the Zoom Q&A. We have league volunteers that will sort the questions. They will remove ones that are redundant. So if your question doesn't appear exactly, it's because we had several questions of a similar nature. And we will not address any questions that are personal, meaning about a person, or inflammatory in nature. So let's get started. Polly Bove is going to kick us off with a terrific presentation, a tutorial really on the funding of schools in California, and specifically about funding for CUSD. Thank you, Polly.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy. I'm really honored to be here tonight and to work with the audience to try to understand what I think is one of the most complicated funding models for schools in the nation. It has gotten a little better over the last 10 or so years, but what is important for the community to know is that until the LCFF, called the Local Control Funding Formula, very clever name because locally we have no control over it, really started off finally leveling the playing field for funding across the state of California. It was very uneven prior to this. So in many ways, this is an incredibly big step forward for the state. It is the minimum amount. In other words, it's the bottom floor of funding that schools can get, and we build from there. That funding is largely given to us through the property taxes that everybody on this call is likely paying, and we're grateful for that. And if the property taxes don't come up to this level that every school is entitled to based on the number of students they have and some other factors I'll talk about, then the state makes up the difference. And that is a guarantee. So that is something good because all school districts can count on it. And if the local property tax happens to be higher than that calculated amount, then we get to keep that property tax, and it makes us a community funded district because all of our funds then come locally and none from the state. Now, CUSD is in a particularly unusual situation. It's part of a tri-district group between Sunnyvale Elementary, Cupertino Union, and Fremont Union High School District. And of the three of us, it is the only one that is not community funded. And I hope to explain why tonight and how that might change and what that really means. The local control funding formula, let me tell you what it is. If you are a district that have a number of high needs students, even a few high needs students, whether they're low income, they're English learners, they're foster youth, or they receive little to no additional funding from the supplemental grants. So Cupertino Union's in this situation. That's great, right? That we don't have so many kids that have high needs and high demand for extra services. But because you don't have that, Cupertino doesn't get any more funding. It does not provide additional funding for any programs or services that address high achieving students. And so again, that base amount is what is provided. And the biggest thing, I would say, these are three strikes that Cupertino has no control over whatsoever. But the biggest one, I think, is the fact that there are many factors that were considered in the local control funding formula, the LCFF. But the biggest one that wasn't considered was zip code. Now, that may seem like an odd thing to say, but I think we all know that the cost of living varies dramatically throughout the state of California. If we were talking about Modesto or the center of California, we'd be talking about a very, very different cost of living than we do in Cupertino, in Sunnyvale, in the Bay Area. And with a higher cost of living, there's a demand to pay our staff more money, and therefore you need more dollars to do that. Unfortunately, the local control funding formula doesn't take that into consideration at all. So I want to talk about the base grant, which is provided for every student. And then the supplemental grant, as I said, for the low income and the English learners, and then the concentration grant, which happens if you have a great many needy students. And that means that at least 55% of the district is those high need students, and that you get an additional 50% of the base grant for each student in excess of the 55% of that threshold. All of these things are terrific. We need it. The students who have these needs absolutely need this funding. Unfortunately, this doesn't work for Cupertino Union that doesn't have enough students that need much of a supplemental grant and certainly don't qualify for the concentration grant. So let me see, this slide is called the effects of declining enrollment, but really what I'm going to be talking about is the fact that the LCFF is, for Cupertino particularly, dependent completely on enrollment. They don't have any students that qualify for those special needs. As I said, they certainly don't qualify for the supplemental money. And when a district is facing declining enrollment, you pretty obviously get fewer dollars because you have fewer students and the funding is based on a per student basis. And then sometimes the funding gets so low that finally the property taxes are equal or higher to the amount the state is going to give you, and you begin to fall into community funded district. Now, some people might think that's not a good idea, but actually it's likely that property tax is going to continue to increase at a rate that's higher than the state would increase the LCFF amount. So in some ways, moving into community funded is a better thing, but not for the short term. What it means is that the LCFF money has gotten so low that you actually fall into using your property tax to fully fund yourself. And I'll show you a graph of that. And the decline in funding is just devastating because although some of these things do matter, it is true that having fewer students costs less. It isn't quite proportional, and it really can have a dire consequence. And I would say to you, Cupertino Union has had no control over these factors. So what you're going to hear about in terms of their need for additional dollars is really based on the fact that they have had no control over these three strikes, which I would again say are mainly based on our zip code, the fact that we have declining enrollment and that we do not have very many students. So this is an example of this, I said, and I want to be very appreciative to Cupertino Union for sharing the actual numbers here because this is, I think, very important. So the blue line here is the local control funding that has been true for Cupertino Union for a number of years. So you start here at 2018-19, you'll see that their funding was at about 145 million. That was pretty steady, a little lower this year, back up to 145 next year. And then it's going to drop. Now the red line is the actual amount of the LCFF funding that's covered by local property tax. So you'll see that at some point the two graphs meet, and where they meet, Cupertino gets to start riding the red graph and going up, but going up slowly. Before that happens, however, they will have dropped from the funding for next year of 145 million to 133 million in 1 year. $12 million is a tremendous drop, about 8% of their budget. It's just absolutely enormous. And yes, it's true that after that time, if we project out, it looks like 2023-4, 24-5, we're going to start to see that gap growing, and they're actually going to be getting more money. But even at that point, I want you to notice 2024-25, they'll only be up to 139 million, where this year or next year, they'll be at 145. So this is not exactly a great situation, but it is one that will continue to grow as property tax grows and will be helpful in the long run to Cupertino. But the time between now and then, they are still going to be struggling. So this is actually just a list of the same information that I showed on that graph, and you'll see it pretty clearly there. It's not completely clear when they're going to fall into their local, the basic aid status, we used to call it, or sometimes it's called community funded. But you can see here the portion of the property tax that's covering the actual entitlement, and when finally the property tax becomes equal or greater, they will indeed fall into community funded. Now, I was going to ask if we could do a survey before I shared this slide, but I'm hoping that it has impact even without a survey. My guess is that if you're on this call, you would not think that of the three districts I mentioned, Cupertino Union School District, Fremont Union High School District, and Sunnyvale Elementary District, that you would think that Sunnyvale Elementary District would be the highest funded district of the three. In other words, every student in Sunnyvale Elementary School District gets $17,101. And this is a 1920 graph. It's a little more now. And Ed Data, which is the state data source, is the one where we got this. And so, and I would also say to you, that's unusual because high school districts are always funded, even under LCFF, a little more than elementary districts. So Sunnyvale gets significantly more dollars per kid. You can see high school, as a high school district, so do we. And there's Cupertino with that very minimum amount and really no way to get more than they have there. And the big blue portion of this is the LCFF or the property tax revenue that each of the districts get. There's some federal money, there's other state revenues, and then the local gold bar that's at the top has to do with the parcel taxes that all three districts have. To the right of this, the far two bar graphs show the state average for high school districts and the state average for elementary school districts. And you'll notice that Cupertino is about $2,300 less per student than even the state average. And again, I would say that's the state average, no matter where they live, no matter what the cost of living is. So this is a significant reason why CUSD is struggling and has been struggling for some time under this new funding model. And it is also fortunate, I think, that they are finally getting to the point where they can rely on property tax, because that has really served our high school district and Sunnyvale Elementary well. And you might ask, why did Sunnyvale get to the basic aid or the community funded status earlier than Cupertino? It has to do with the base of some of the businesses and industry there, along with the housing and the turnover in housing that raised the property tax to a higher level. So the other thing you might ask yourself is, as you look across this, how many school districts are in Cupertino's shoes? How many school districts have that base funding and not much else? The answer to that is very, very few, almost none. And so Cupertino is in a unique position and one that is not enviable. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. And I think that transition to community funded is going to be, in the long run, a good thing for Cupertino Union. but right now they're between a rock and a hard place, as they have been for some time. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. I know it's a complex concept, but there you go.
I'm going to ask you, Polly, one quick question before we bring all the panelists back.
Sure.
I got it ahead of time and I got it again here in Q&A. And that is, so, and I know you kind of already said this, but so why don't we just go to the state and ask for more money?
Well, I mean, I would say that the state isn't, that's not the way the legislation works. I mean, they've worked long and hard to create this formula. And they do add money to the formula. At times you'll hear in the news that they're adding money to the LCFF. And they have added a great deal of money to what Jerry Brown would call fully funded over the years. But let's remember that that's meant to be sort of the basement funding for schools. And the whole idea was that you would build on that based on student need. And certainly, as I said, not zip code. So there is no going to the state and asking for more money. This is the money they give. And actually, it's more generous in some ways than it might have been in the past. But there were other ways of getting funding in the past that no longer are part of the LCFF.
So this isn't a situation where a school district just hasn't worked hard enough with the state to get more money. They've gotten all they're going to get.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's what it's meant to be. It's not meant to be funding that's influenced in some way. It's meant to be base funding that all school districts in the state of California can do.
And somebody also pointed out that you said 1920 when you were referring to this, and by that you meant 2019 to 2020, correct. Not the year 1920. Very
no.
I'm going to ask.
This would have been great funding in 1920.
Yeah. So if you don't mind stopping sharing, and we'll bring all our panelists on, that would be great. Very good. Thank you all. And we're just going to jump right into it. And this first question is for Stacy, Lori, and Phyllis. Measure O was on the ballot a year ago and asked for an increase from $250 to $375. It required a 2/3 vote to pass, and it did receive 60% of the vote, though. You're now coming back a year later and asking for a slightly larger tax from $250 to $398. So really a bunch of questions here. The first one, and I'll do these one by one as you respond, we kind of heard it, but so why do you need this increase?
Well, I think as Polly alluded to, as we've dealt with the LCFF funding over the years when it was put into place in 2014, we have continued to address the low funded, and we've done that through pretty dramatic cuts each year of reductions in staff, reduction in programs, really doing some combination. And so we had known, 3 to 4 years ago that we were really doing these cuts to delay what was the inevitable, that we were going to need some additional funding, ultimately resulted in this fall when we began our conversations about closing schools to recoup some of the funds. So in order for us to really create that long-term fiscal stability, we have a strategic plan in place. We know where we need to be. These funds really will be identified throughout the upcoming years as to get us to be that fiscal solvency and allow us to meet all of our needs. I think one of the pieces that's really important with our previous measure that didn't pass in last March, one of the big focuses on that was to provide salary increases to our employees. We do try to continue to be competitive with our surrounding districts. It is a higher cost of living. We haven't been able to give salary increases to our employees for the last 2 years. We currently, as we're looking at our current budget, do not have any kind of a salary increase built into that budget as well. And so to expect our employees to go for another 3, 5, 8 years without a salary increase, we would begin to lose our very, very valuable employees.
And why didn't you wait for a regular election cycle and save the very high cost of this special election?
I think that just really builds to the importance of it getting out there now that we needed when we looked at our fiscal solvency and where we are in the long term. Really, the conversation around the parcel tax came from feedback and conversations with our community as we were discussing about closing. Possibility of closing schools. Our community really reached out to us and said, is there not anything else that we can do? We will support the district. We are interested in being a partner. And this was one of the possible solutions that we could do to avoid the closure of schools.
How did you arrive at the 398? It was 275 a year ago, 398 now. How did that come about?
We really took a look at our strategic plan and identified what our needs were for the outlying years and did a cost analysis of what the dollars amount were that we would need in our budget each of the outlying years. And it fell on this 398, you know, the additional top of what we were already receiving with the 250 for this replacement really does get us into a stable fiscal environment. We did have conversations about going for a higher parcel tax at one time, but really wanted to be realistic and look at something that we thought the community could support.
One question that came in, I'm going to respond on your behalf. Somebody asked how, if the parcel tax passes, how long before it runs out? That will be June 30th, 2029. This is for Lori and Phyllis. If Measure A passes, are the new funds restricted in use? And if so, how and what for? So then additional funds.
And then let you chime in. The funds will be restricted to what it says on the ballot statement. We make a promise to the community about the way those funds are spent. And that's what we do. And we actually have an oversight committee that looks at that every year to make certain that we are spending the funds as we promised. Now, when you go out for a parcel tax, you can really ask for anything you want. I mean, you can be pie in the sky, but whatever you put in the ballot statement, you're obliged to honor that so that the voters know what they're expecting.
Phyllis, you touched on this, and it is a question I was going to get to in a couple, and that is the Citizen Oversight Panel. We got a question on this. What is the responsibility of that oversight panel? I know you've just said it, but a little bit more, and who selects them? And the nature of the question I received was in the vein of, if the Citizen Oversight Group is picked by the board, then is it really citizen oversight? So how does that work?
Well, I'm going to take a stab at this and then let Stacy chime in. People apply. There's an application process. It rolls over every couple of years, but the same, and I think actually Orrin has served on this committee.
I was going to, I'll chime in after. Go ahead.
He can chime in too. So it rolls over. Not everybody changes every year. It's every couple of years they change. So those applications come in, they're vetted by the district. And then the list of people that the district folks feel are the most appropriate are presented to the board. And they come from a variety of categories. And I'm going to let Orrin and Stacy sort of talk about what those categories are, because there are certain people that certain organizations and types of people that we specifically look at.
So yeah, I was on a couple of the oversight committees for the school bonds, not parcel tax, but it's a similar concept. And as Phyllis said, they're represented from the parents community, it's represented from a taxpayer group, they're represented from senior groups. So there are different categories that are meant to represent all of the different interests involved. And you know, my experience there is that they did that. We had people with all different views. We asked a lot of tough questions about, in particular, this is school bonds, so it was construction and what was going on and all that. I don't know the particular structure of the oversight committee this time, but I would assume it's in a similar vein. Stacy, you might have a view on that.
Yeah, I would just, you know, add that we do look at having that broad representation from throughout the entire community, and would want to do the same with this. We do get updates from the committee. We have them report to the board, and really that is our accountability for ensuring that we're spending the funds as we promised we would.
Actually, typically the oversight committee does a separate from the district an annual report every year of their activities as well. So it's a public thing that goes out to all of the community members.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I serve on an oversight committee as well at the county level. That's a general open application process, although categories, as you've mentioned, are looked for. So I guess to the person that asked me this, would it be fair to say the skeptics should apply? Yep. People that are worried should definitely apply?
Absolutely.
And okay. I'll say, Tracy, real quick, I serve on the high school district oversight committee for both the combined bond and parcel. My experience has been that the committee is very well balanced. There are definitely people who challenge the thinking of the district who serve with me on that committee routinely. To Orrin's point, an annual report is produced every year. to certify that the funds are being spent, to Phyllis's point, with the way in which they are promised to the voters. And the one thing I would have expanded on Phyllis's answer for is, if you read our ballot language pretty clearly on this one, we're calling out that none of those funds will be spent on administrator expenses. They are going to essentially directly into kids in classrooms. So our programs and our people who are frontline serving our kids in our classrooms.
I got a couple of questions, and I'm going to just ask very fast, and anybody that can answer it. If Measure A passes, what does that mean to the average funding per pupil? How much will it raise it by?
It's about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Stacy. So it raises us to about $14 million a year. We're slightly over that with enrollment right now. So going from $8 million to $14 million a year probably roughly equates to a couple extra $100 per student. I can do the exact figure.
So it would not get us, the nature of this question is to get us to state average. It would not.
It will not get us to state average. No, our total combined of the $14 million annually will raise us a little less than $1,000 per pupil. But given that we are a couple $1,000 below the state average.
And when you say that combined, you're really talking about the 375. You have 250 plus the 148. It's the
250 plus the 148. So the 498 total, or sorry, 398 total gets us to the $14 million total.
And then there was an optimist in the group that asked, Governor Newsom recently announced a significant budget surplus. The nature of the question is basically, does this mean additional funds to the district?
I think I would like to say that we are hoping that the school districts see some of those funds, but we won't know until further along in the year.
But would it be enough to get you to think state average? Is it going to be?
No, it wouldn't be anywhere near.
Very good.
I wanted to make one more point on, because, and you didn't mention this, Polly, but other districts, because I was still am on the SEEF board and intimately involved in some of these questions. Other school districts have significantly higher parcel taxes in Cupertino as well, which helps them with their, I remember Palo Alto being way over 1,000. Of course, it's a combined district, but way over $1,000. So that's another thing that provides some inequalities in how the different districts are funded.
Yeah, and just to unpack what you've just said, Orrin, by combined district, you mean a K through 12?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
no problem.
Just one more comment, Tracy, and that is, if the governor does come forth with money for education, it's likely that it will be distributed on the local control funding formula, which means that we will again be on the short end of the stick because we don't have those students that qualify for the additional money. So we would be getting less than other districts.
I'm going to shift here. I have so many questions coming in, and then I have in the opponent's response on the ballot measure, one of the criticisms that was raised against CUSD was the number of administrators that had increased during sort of difficult budget times against the number of teachers which had decreased. I can give the numbers that were in the opponent's response, where administrators had grown from 41 in 2015 to 146 in 2016. At the same time, teachers declined from 864 in 2015 to 790 in 2019. So Stacy, maybe you can respond to that one.
I would be pleased to. So, you know, we have continued to make cuts throughout the years, and our first target has always been our administrative, our upper management, and tried to reduce and stay away from the classroom as far as possible. And so our cuts each year have been at our management level, and we have significantly decreased our numbers there. I think where the misrepresentation on the numbers really falls is who is falling into what's considered this management, and that higher number is really taking into account our psychologists and our speech therapists who are not administrative. They are considered certificated just like our teachers are. So I think when numbers were collected, there was a misrepresentation of counting who is actually an administrator and who isn't.
So let me just, I want you to be maybe more specific though. is it fair to say that administrators did increase or not? What happened with it, pure administrators?
Administrators have not increased. They have decreased from 2015. They were at about 118 FTEs or full-time equivalently, and we're down to 84 FTEs in our administration. And those would be considered directors, our executive cabinet, our managers of classified, our directors of classified. Those would be the type of positions that are management.
And I can point viewers to two different sources they can go to. If you go to our website and you go directly to the Citizens Advisory Committee binder, if you Google for that, search for that on our website, there is a slide in that binder that very clearly illustrates the numbers that Stacy's outlining and the decrease over the last several years in administrators. The other thing you can do is actually do what is in the ballot statement of the opponents, which is to go to eddata.org and look it up yourself. If you go to eddata.org and you pull up Cupertino Union School District and you take the tab for staff, and then you scroll down to the box for administrators and pupil services and you open up the data, there's a line item that says view data. On that slide on eddata that they're referring to, you can see that they're pulling from multiple categories. So they're using a base number in 1 year that's pulling from a single category, and they're combining that between multiple staffing categories in their final year. So anyone can go and pull that themselves and see exactly where those numbers are coming from, and that it's not an apples to apples comparison between the base year and the out year.
I'm going to keep pushing us along. We got two more questions from our audience. One said, one is asking, why did you not ask for enough money through this new parcel tax to bring us up to the standard per student?
I think we wanted to recognize our community support and be realistic. And I shared, we did have many conversations about going for a much higher parcel tax, almost double the amount of what we actually are asking for. But we really, through feedback from our communities, looked at what was realistic to ask for and what could we possibly get passed. You know, that's really our goal, is to get it passed and to have us be fiscal solvent. We didn't at the time feel like we needed to over ask from the community. We really do just want to work in that partnership with them.
Okay, a couple more questions. Somebody's providing you a creative solution. Let's see if this will work. They said, why can't we increase attendance by allowing those grandparents within the district to have their grandchildren attend CUSD?
So we have actually, over the last years, as we've worked with our Citizen Advisory Committee and our Community Advisory Committee, looked at creative ways to increase our enrollment. That really was our first target when we even began these conversations five years ago, is how do we continue to increase? And we changed our policies, and we did allow much more flexibility with families being able to enroll in our school district. The number of students that we actually were able to attract was very minimal and did not have the impact. It still was nowhere near the number of students that we're losing in the decreasing enrollment.
I'm going to go back to the Oversight Committee very quickly. Somebody asked for more information on how it's selected. Is there any place on your website where somebody could go and learn how to apply to be on the Oversight Committee?
They can go onto our CUSD website and go under the business department, and there's information on applying for both our bond and our parcel tax committees when they come available.
And I believe if they subscribe to our email, whenever we have openings, we publicize those on our all district email.
And how could they get your email? How would they subscribe to that?
It's on the opening page of the website. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a place there where you can sign up as a community member to receive the district bulletins.
Excellent. Okay, so let's turn to what if it doesn't pass us? What are the consequences of Measure A failing, both to the school and to the community?
So I think the biggest impact of it is really looking at where our long-term stability will be. We would be okay for the 21-22 school year, but really that long-term, we would need to continue to look at cuts. The discussion of closing schools to save the revenue at particular sites would still be back on the table for discussion. We would not be able to offer salary increases for employees. We would begin to probably lose some of our very valuable employees. And you know, CUSD is such a strong instructional and educational environment. We don't want to lose that. So it really will have an impact on what we're able to continue to offer to our families.
Okay. For anybody who would like to respond to this, but I'll hand it to you, Stacy, to begin with. Is there a size? I'd like to shift now actually to school size and school closures. And is there a size of a school that is too small? And if so, why?
Well, I think when we talk about school size, it's really about the ability to offer that strong instructional program, to have that collaborative environment for our teachers. And so we do have various sizes of our campuses, and we did a lot of work over the last couple of years, really identifying, what is that ideal size of school where we can have that collaborative environment for our teachers. We can offer all of the instructional programs, and we really were looking at our elementary schools that had 3 kindergartners and above, 3 kindergarten classes that would fill through 5th grade. Where we begin to get concerned is when it drops under that and we have a campus where we're only able to offer a single class at 1 grade level. Then there really is no students are locked into that 1 class. The teachers do not have that collaborative professional environment. We're not able to offer all of the extras that we may at another site that has campuses, and yet to maintain running a campus with such small class really is the same as running a campus with 3 to 4 classes at that grade level. And so it really does begin, there are definitely some benefits to small schools, and we know, our parents love some of our small schools. We love those small schools, but when it really becomes that difficulty where we're not even able to fill a classroom at a certain level, that's where we would be concerned. And that is where, as we're looking out years, some of our campuses were continuing that declining, where they would continue to decline, continuing to decline, where it really would affect the number of classrooms on the campus.
Han, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to pitching about class size. It's people think smaller is good, but for a school, smaller doesn't really mean really good. You have less resources, less parent participation, you have less students to work with music, arts, sports. And for high school district, there's a disadvantage of offering AP classes. Can you offer 5 AP classes so students can enroll easily? And smaller schools cannot offer that. So small doesn't mean really good, but there is a like Stacy said, like 3 kindergarten classes, then you can offer all those resources. So I would like to tell the parents that smaller doesn't mean really good.
Well, Polly, go ahead, you're on mute.
Yes, just a really quick add to that. I think it's really easy to think of funding as per school rather than per student. So when a school is small, it has less dollars, fewer dollars than it would if it had more students. So small schools get fewer dollars, and that's really an important part of that. I know that was something that was a little bit surprising to some of our families, and that whole comprehensive nature of what we're able to offer in this community, whether it's at kindergarten level or all the way through high school, really gets compromised if we don't have the diversity of options. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. In a small school, you get very few dollars.
Is there a parity issue as well with other schools when you have a small school? What I'm asking is, if I retain 1 school, I need a minimum amount of administrators to manage that 1 school. Does that not disproportionately harm other schools because it costs more per student to run a small school than it does a large school? Is that a fair statement? That's
a very fair statement. You're still going to staff a small school with a custodian, with secretaries, with your admin staff, your library media. So all of that is still going to be offered at a very small school that would be similar to a school that may be 1.5 its size.
And even just keeping the lights on. I think as a board, I think one of the things we're very conscious of is the equitable distribution of resources. And that won't be always exactly the same. That's not what equitable means, but it's really trying to assess the big picture and look at the best distribution across the entirety to ensure that all children are getting the same opportunities. And so it's more to do with the opportunity to experience a quality program. Is the overall goal there rather than cookie cutter. But certainly that does mean that there's a range, to Stacy's point, of sort of a high and a low. And when you're outside of that, what are the consequences of that? And in some ways, there are pluses and minuses, to being on the extreme side of either end of that spectrum.
Wait, Han, please go ahead.
So we're talking about programs, and Lori says, so I've been telling parents that the programs are more important than the size of a school. For example, I really want to pitch in for Cupertino Union School District. This is the only public school district I know that has charter school characteristics. It offers Christian McAuliffe Parent Co-op. It offers Portel year-round. It offers Ferrier A+. It offers STEM programs, curriculums at De Vargas. It has great special education. So Cupertino Union School District is really unique is they offer great programs. So I think in any, if I were a parent, my kids are all grown up, I would look at programs rather than I can walk to the school. This is my neighborhood school. And I've been telling parents, once you combine schools, in 2 or 3 years, you know, that is my neighborhood school. You're always going to have a neighborhood school, but I will concentrate more on programs. CUSD is one unique public school district that offers really charter school characteristics. So I just want to pitch in for CUSD. It's really a wonderful school district. I'm very proud to be living in a school district.
This is a good transition to a couple other questions. I've gotten a lot more. I just want to acknowledge the people listening. I've gotten more on budget, and time permitting, I'll come back to some of the budget questions I got. Let me ask, this will go to Stacy, Lori, Phyllis. I may have this wrong, but I think I've been told that in the 90s, CUSD had about the same enrollment size that it currently has, roughly in the 15,000 student range. But we had about 20 schools at that point in time. Now we fast forward, we're in 2021, we have 15,000 students and we have 26 schools, correct? So here's my question. Why can't we operate just fine with 20 schools today?
So we actually have 25 schools currently.
25, thank you.
We have 5 middle schools, 19 K-8s, and then, K-5s and 1 K-8. So just to clarify that information. If we were to reduce down to 20, as we look across our district, again, if we look at our ideal size of schools, it would require some pretty significant boundary changes to reduce down to 20 schools across the board.
But so Stacy, reflect on, I think I had it right that in the past, same enrollment size, fewer schools. Now enrollment size is the same, more schools. What we lived with it before, why can't we live with it now?
I would like to answer for them. I think they can, but to change boundaries, it is a huge task. Just imagine how many years ago we added a middle school. That was a huge controversial issue. So there is a saying, if a board member wants to stop their board career, it's to change a boundary, start a change boundary process. So I think it doesn't mean they can't do it, but it takes a big effort, like Stacy said.
So let me probe on this. This is the heart of what the community is mulling. And I think Orrin wants to chime in, but they're saying, yes, it's hard, but we lived with it before, it was fine. We can live with it again, it will be fine. What you're really saying is parents are invested in their local school. Their hearts and souls are there. That is a hard thing to change.
Well, I think, and I know Lori wants to speak as well, but when we look at some of the changes that happened is just our class sizes in our primary grades that are now at 24:1 that had changed and we're at a different size at that time. And I think to Hung's point, we could make the change and it would require us transporting kids across major thoroughways, major highways that they would have to go to get to their home schools. And that was purposely one of the things that we looked about even during we were having the conversations about closing schools. How do we keep that sense of neighborhoodness where students can still walk to schools, that they're not having to pass through some of these dangerous streets? And so, could that be a consideration that we may have to consider in the future as we're looking at declining enrollment and not having the funding? It could be.
So let me do this before. I know people want to respond to this one, but I have another question that will feed into it, and then please respond at that point. So what I have heard in my very narrow survey in preparing for this is that what parents value most, and I'm just going to ask for a raise of hands if you agree with me, what parents value most in their school is quality education for their children, and more specifically, quality teachers. to teach their kids. Would anybody disagree? Okay, we all agree. Got it. Now, we agree that parents care a lot about quality, totally appropriate. And then living on a very busy street with an elementary school at the end of it, it certainly feels like many, many students are driven to school. They do not walk their kids to school, they drive their kids to school. So this is where I want to pull this together. Hung said focus on programs. You all agree it's quality of students. We all know that there has been a big shift due to safety for children, that their parents drive them, they don't walk or bicycle. So why is it so hard to close the school? What is that impediment? Why can't we pull it off? I have to tell you, I've been getting lots of questions as we've been on about this, people wanting me to ask you this.
And it's multifactorial.
We lived with it before, and we have these other things that we want to have happen. We want to invest in quality teachers and programs. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, so it's multifactorial, and I think it's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of, I know that I myself have that same question, and when I argue that out with myself at night, I think it is multifactorial. I think to your original question about we were at one point, I think one thing to keep in mind is you have to take an apples to apples comparison on that. Part of the way that we accommodated our increase in enrollment on the way up was to shift kids off of our elementary school campuses up to middle schools and expand our middle schools. So we did add space to our middle schools to accommodate for that, which changed sort of the configuration district-wide of where our classrooms were and at what grades they were at. So it's not the same as 20 years ago or 30 years ago to look back and say, what worked then, why doesn't it work now? Because frankly, the facility configuration of the district changed. That said, could you change that facility configuration again? And my answer to that is yes, but with time and with very conscientious planning about how to balance not only where our enrollment is today and where the different places that enrollment balances out throughout our very large district, right? You have to remember we're the largest K-8 in Northern California. We span 26 square miles. We have 25 campuses, and our enrollment decline is not even throughout the whole district. There is an imbalance between different regions of the district. And so to Stacy's point, to simply say, close a school here doesn't necessarily fix our problem if that doesn't help us balance and reconfigure in a way that's smart, that accommodates not only where our enrollment is today, but where it's projected to go. I think the other piece we haven't touched on yet, which you may, Tracy, so I may be getting ahead of you, is what's going to happen over the next several years with our population. There are a lot of unknowns that were thrown into the mix with COVID and the change in the exodus out of the Bay Area with COVID, which we're still not totally sure what's going to happen there and what will and won't rebound from that. But I think the other unknown is what's going to happen with a lot of the development cycles, the RENA cycles, the RENA allocations over the next several years with all 6 of our cities. So we serve portions of 6 separate cities, which means we've got 6 separate city councils that are all going to be wrestling with their RENA numbers.
And I'm going to get to RENA and Valco and all of that in a few questions. So I'm just going to hold that one.
Okay, that's totally fine. But I think to sum up, in answer to your question, it's not so simple as to just, it's not a light switch on or off as to whether or not we close a school. And I think part of our struggle as to how to do it together is that we do need to consider what's happening with our enrollment, but that needs to be with a very robust and listening carefully to our community process that brings everybody along with us as much as possible. And in the end, not everybody's going to be happy with wherever we land over time, but I think time is part of what we need.
Let's address enrollment though, because you said we need time, but others would say you've had lots of time, right? That we've seen this coming for a long time. I think Orrin might want to chime in on this. Seen this coming for a long time. And a lot of the questions I'm getting here, right now I've got too many to go through. They're coming in fast and furious, but is how much more time will it take? How long will it take us to convince parents who fundamentally do not want their local school to go away? And so, well, I'm going to come back to that, but I think there is the patience of the community has been spent quite a bit in the last several years. And there's a sense now, time to address the problem, no more postponing it. Orrin, you would like to comment?
Yeah, no, you know, I'm going to be the bad guy in here for a second. I think it's overdue. I think the handwriting's been on the wall for a long time. You know, being on the city council, we've dealt with the other side of this issue, which is that you can't build a new building because our schools are going to get overcrowded when the handwriting's been on the wall if they're not. But that's a whole separate issue I'm not going to go into. But, you know, I think all deference to the board members that are here, I think the can has been kicked down the road with the previous superintendent. I know he tried some different things. I'm on the CEF board, so I know we're working with the superintendent. We tried to fill this voluntarily by people all doing their own, you know, voluntary parcel tax, if you will, $25 a month for, you know, for every student, every parent, and that didn't work. So I do think, I mean, I'm a little conflicted myself about this measure. Now, having said that, we're here, and I don't think it's fair to punish the teachers or the students for that lapse of planning. I would like to feel comfortable that the board understands that and is going to deal with it now, because I think, you know, the funding part, Polly, you got that down. Nobody can argue with any of that, but the expense part, closing a school not only saves money, but it can provide revenue. There's schools that are being rented out right now. So
Orrin, I'm going to turn to that as the very next question, and then Polly, I'm going to come back. Let me tell you a question I'm going to ask you, and we'll come back to in a moment.
Sure.
And that is, so Polly, think about your experiences around the Bay Area and who's closed what and how they've worked it. But let me ask Stacy, Phyllis, Lori, whoever would like to respond. What are the real facts on closing a school? What does it save us? And I always hear it as there's expense reduction, and then there's the potential for revenue enhancement. How do the two of those go together?
Yeah, so when we look at closing a typical one of our elementary schools, we would have a cost savings of about $500,000 in operational, and that would be administrative costs, secretary, a counselor, or excuse me, custodians, the utilities. We would have about a $500,000 in operationals. When we were looking at our standard ability to lease out the property, we would generate about $900,000 on our most of our elementary schools. So we were estimating a closure of a school would, through the reduction of the cost of operating it and the increase in the rental lease fees, we would generate about an additional $1.4 million for an elementary school. That would be income that comes in.
So maybe 1% of your budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Tracy, I'd like to just respond to your previous question really quickly about why we aren't closing schools when we did. I've been around this district for a very, very long time. So I was here back in the 70s and 80s when we closed a lot of schools. And we did it thoughtfully, and we moved cohorts of kids so that friends were able to stay together, and small neighborhoods were able to stay together. We did it successfully. I have had a lot of emails from parents, current parents who were in our schools as students at the time, who were part of that closure, and they insist that they were not damaged, and they insist that the children that are involved in school closures now would not be damaged. So I'm going to agree with Orrin. We have kicked this can down the road, and at some point we need to address it. And I don't know when that will happen. It may cost me my job as a board member to even say this, and that's okay. I think we have to do what's right for kids and what's right for the school district.
And I'll jump in and I'll just say really quick that on top of everything Phyllis just said, I also think that ultimately that's not what Measure A is about, right? I think the work that we need to do around our declining enrollment is very important work, and we need to continue to address that, and we need to continue to plan around how and when and what that timeline looks like. And in the meantime, our schools and our programs and our district is profoundly underfunded, has been for a long time, continues to be, and it impacts everything that we do in this district, including having to consider to close schools for more than just our declining enrollment reasons, which is not good for kids.
I still have a ton of questions, so I'm just going to push. I'm sorry, Hung. I'm going to ask Polly if she could just respond to her experiences, what she knows other districts have done as they've tackled this problem fairly recently.
Well, it's a painful process. I don't know anybody that hasn't suffered from it. I mean, Phyllis's description is years after the fact when they did do it right. And years after the fact, people can say it really wasn't as bad as we thought. But a lot of this is worrying about what will happen, how it will be experienced. And you can look at it differently 20 years, 2 years, 10 years later. So what I can tell you is that it is incredibly challenging to do. Many superintendents lose their jobs, many board members lose their jobs. And it's really because it feels like people are losing something precious, something that they may have really sacrificed a lot to get. They wanted that school right down the street. And I would say, Tracy, I think you're really right. In recent times, we don't see many kids walking to school. We finally are seeing more high school kids bike to school, but elementary, not so much. And I think there really is a safety concern on the part of parents, and probably also a busy life concern. So they're getting their kid out of the house and to school at a particular time. And that makes it a little easier to go a little further away. But I do think people may have purchased a home, had a particular idea in mind, and this challenges it. And so I don't know anybody that's been able to do it without a lot of pain and suffering, except I do think it changes after the fact, like Phyllis is saying. Done right, a few years down the road, people find that it's better than they thought.
And people hate change.
That's true.
That's a human characteristic. Look, I'm going to move on. And Stacy, this one is point blank for you. I've gotten lots of questions about nobody knows what it means if Measure A will pass and how that relates to school closures. So I'm going to read you two statements. The first one was in the ballot materials that we received. It says Measure A will prevent school closures due to lack of funding. That was in the ballot measure. Now, the other one was a statement that you released 2-3 weeks ago about declining enrollment, in which you said, for the next 2 years, we will not be engaging in any talks surrounding the closure of schools due to enrollment. So when I read these together in combination, it seems to say no discussions on school closures will be held in the next 2 years. So my question is, if Measure A passes, under what circumstances, if any, would there be discussions about school closures, and when would those discussions take place?
So we did make the commitment with the passing of the parcel tax that we would no longer have the discussion about school closures directly related to the finances, because we would have that fiscal stability. What we recently did in the 2 to 3 weeks ago through our discussions and dealing with the impact of the COVID is recognizing that our next 2 years are going to be a lot of mitigation over the impact of the COVID in this 1 year, that we really did want to have our focus on getting our students back to in person. And so we wouldn't be having the conversations about the declining enrollment and the impact at campuses. In 2 years, we will look at our declining enrollment. We'll continue to monitor those numbers, but we really will need to look at how can we best utilize our campuses. Back to your original question, I think when we say, when a school is too small, we would really need to look at, is a school too small to truly be able to offer the resources to students? And that would be the conversation that we'd begin having.
So one question I got while we've been talking here was specifically, will they still close schools if the parcel tax passes? And I'm not hearing there's a definitive response to that.
I think, to Phyllis and Lori's, we will have to continue to look at our declining enrollment. Our numbers are coming in more drastic of a declining enrollment than we initially thought. We don't know if that's just initially the result of COVID, if it's going to be longstanding, but we have to continue to look at that. To operate a school with not even full classes at a 1 grade level classroom really is not providing the education that we believe our students would deserve. And so that would be the conversation as to, does a school in that situation remain open? And if the discussion was to explore the closing, we would go through the process. We would engage the community. It would be a timely process where people would be notified, because, I think to everyone else's point, closing a school is painful. It is always painful. What we experienced last fall with our community coming forward and speaking is seen throughout all research. When you talk about closing of schools, it's a sense of loss. And so what our Citizen Advisory Committee had really tried to create is, as we talk about school closures, how do we recreate that sense of neighborhood by combining 2 schools? And so that would really be our focus too, because I think there is that sense of loss and we have to give something back to the community.
This next question is for Orrin, Hung, and Polly, and that is, what we're really talking about in the last few minutes was really how do you effectively balance the desires of the parents to preserve their neighborhood school with the community's expectation that CUSD will be prudent with their tax dollars. So how do you do this? I mean, I hear it. I don't have children, but I can understand families that do love the fact that our school is just a few blocks away. But what do you say to everybody else? And how do you balance that? And I do appreciate, Stacy, that the people you hear from most are your parents, not those of us that don't have them, but all of us will be voting. So how do we pull all that together?
So maybe I'll chime in a little bit as a community member who doesn't have kids anymore. And why would I support Measure A? First, because public education is the best equalizer in our community. We all gotta support public education. Second, because CUSD is underfunded. And third, because CUSD offers great programs. I mean, those are three reasons I would support it, and also helps my property tax. But yes, then I would ask, why would I support a school district who would operate a school that has only one kindergarten class, or maybe next year will be half a kindergarten class? I think CUSD needs time. You cannot tell Stedman they did not try. They got a citizens advisory committee. They got parents have different models of how do you combine schools. Never say close schools. It's always about combined schools. And you're still going to have a neighborhood school, just a different neighborhood school. So, for example, on my neighborhood, I have Faria on my Ragnar on my right side, Lincoln on my left side, Kennedy middle school right in the middle. If we move those two schools, combine Lincoln and Ragnar, become Lincoln, Ragnar, and stays at Kennedy, that's still my neighborhood school, right? So it's not about losing your neighborhood school, but it's also about change. Change is hard. CUSD needs its parcel tax now so that they have time to change. So I think that's a fair way to ask everyone to support Measure A, because CUSD needs time to change. And I have confidence that if CUSD continues to lose enrollment, say 500 kids per year, in 2 years, they would have to really look at, and the parents will understand, half a kindergarten in your neighborhood school is really not a neighborhood school. So I think time is of essence. Let's not talk about what happened before. Let's look at present and what can happen in the future. Support Measure A is what going to give CUSD time. It's great for the community, not just for parents and kids.
I think the one thing that we've danced around a little bit is that I think most people understand is that their home values are highly tied to the quality of the school districts, both school districts that we have here. So from just a pure return on investment, it's, setting all that aside, that I think they're kicking a can down the road, and they still are, and I'd like to see them do something different. When you go to the bottom line here, it's a good value. You're going to spend a little bit of money in your property tax, and it's going to keep your home price significantly higher than neighboring communities. It always has, and hopefully, as a homeowner here, a lot of my retirement wealth is tied up in. I want to see that happen. So I think that, from a purely practical point of view, like I said, I've gone into this with like, wait a minute, they haven't done this, they haven't done that, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, what's the right thing going forward? And do I have confidence in the board members that are here and the ones that are not here that I know to make the right decisions moving forward? And I do. So
to add, that is $1.09 a day that we invest into our elementary school, and I think it's worth the investment.
I'm going to shift gears. I'm now going to get to development, and I'm going to start this one off with Orrin and Hung. Is it fair or is it unfair to say that the city of Cupertino's policies regarding development have adversely impacted school funding?
So I don't, to some extent, the biggest thing really is just the price of homes in Cupertino has prevented people with starting families from living here. I mean, when I started in Cupertino many years ago, you know, yeah, I had to stretch and get a note from my boss that I was going to get a raise so I can get a mortgage and all that. But I could still do that with my wife pregnant with our first kid on the way. People can't do that nowadays. There's no way, you know, I mean, she stopped work and you know, after that, after she did the down payment and then we got on my salary, we could do that. You just can't do that now. So yes, people are still moving to Cupertino as they grow up, and now it's their second home. So the high school district, I don't think is impacted as much besides being funded differently. So I think that's been a bigger factor. But certainly, you know, some of the development, if it would have happened, you know, and again, many people here know that there were a number of things that were approved that just never got built. So the council, you know, did approve, you know, the replacement for the Hamptons there, the Irvine project. They approved something in Marina. They approved something in the Oaks that now is moving forward. So I don't think it's fair to lay it all on them, and just my view.
So I'm going to answer that. It's yes and no. No, because you can build all the housing you want. You can build a lot of office buildings. You get more tax, but CUSD is still a local control funding formula school district. It's going to still back fund by the state. It's not going to increase their funding unless they got so much tax and have so little kids and they become community funded. But that means you have to close schools or combine schools. You can't keep 25 schools with so few kids, right? So no, if we can build a whole Valco, but the tax money comes in still not going to be enough to make CUSD a community funded school. So CUSD is still going to be funded by the state. They're still going to be the lowest funded school district. Yes, it's because we are not building homes that bring kids in, right? So it's yes and no. So, and I want to say that if developers start saying we're going to build housing now, it's not going to happen for another 3 to 5 years. Valco, even if we start building now, it won't have family moving until 5 years later. So CUSD need to really look at their demographic for the next 5 years and really work through that. You know, kids. So no, we can build all you want, but the property tax that brings in doesn't help CUSD because CUSD is still state-funded LCFF school district, unless they become community-based.
I do want to remind people that the biggest property taxpayer by far in the city of Cupertino is not in the Cupertino School District.
Yes. Apple tax does not come to Cupertino Union School District. Right. It goes to Santa Clara Unified School District.
That would change things
the garage
pretty dramatically.
Yeah. Yes. The garage goes to CUSD, but not the whole building. So CUSD doesn't benefit from it, but the city of Cupertino does. Yes. So you see the school boundary thing is complicated, but I'm just trying to tell is, Tracy, no, you can build all the housing you want, but if CUSD is the LCFF, the property tax is not helping.
But I think we just saw from Polly's presentation is that we're headed towards community funded. So it could help us quite a bit.
Then you cannot keep all the schools because you're going to have so few kids.
So,
right?
so let me shift now to Valco and the recent RENA allocations. So for those listening, the state has some rules that requires every community to build adequate housing. Cupertino has been a little bit of a laggard here. And so there are, between Valco and the RENA, there are literally thousands of potential homes that would be added into the Cupertino, into CUSD boundaries. So the question, this is to anybody that would like to answer it, will that solve our funding and our enrollment problem?
So I think okay, Orrin, you go first.
I think it'll help. I mean, there's no doubt that more homes help because you have the potential more students. But again, if you look at the mix of what's going on with, you know, more, you know, 1 bedroom, loft, all that kind of thing that, you know, that people are using to pack more stuff in, there's probably less, you know, pupil generation coming out of that. Certainly versus
fewer families likely to move in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, your classic 3 and 4 bedroom house is going to generate more students than a 1 bedroom apartment.
But if you're headed for, but let me just say, if you're headed for community funded, that's a good thing. So it's okay, because the property value of Valco right now compared to what it will be once it's built out, even in those small units, is going to be significantly higher and generate property tax. And so if what's happening appears to be true on that graph, and thank you again, CUSD, for providing it, that Valco will help, not because it generates kids.
Right.
Valco will help because it generates taxes.
But you still have to think about combining schools. You just cannot afford 25 schools when you have so few kids, right? Once you get into community funded, that means you have fewer kids, more taxes, fewer kids. So it's a balance the CUSD board and the CUSD district need to work on, and your demographer will give you good estimates for the next 3-5 years, so you can work on it.
And I think the other really important thing to remember is school districts have no control over where those projects are, right? So our city councils will work through their own allocation processes themselves. We have, like I said earlier, 6 city councils that are all going to go through their own cycles and their own processes and decide where to approve and locate. And then the developers who own those properties will decide whether or not it pencils out for them to decide to build. We don't really have control over where within our district that's going to be, number one. And number two, you have to remember that some of our 6 cities, for example, Cupertino, with the majority of the city sitting within our district, has a lot of land that could affect us in such a way. If you take, let's say, Sunnyvale or even Los Altos or Saratoga, many less commercial parcels within those areas and or high density residential zoned within those portions of our district. And so maybe less likely to affect us or affect us in a way with large swings in student generation rates, right? Coming out of those potential future developments. You know, I can give you a really quick example, Tracy. The only really commercial parcel within the city of Los Altos just was recently being considered by the owner for a mixed use development. And they pulled their plans back out of the city as soon as they secured a long-term tenant. So, you know, now they've said they have no plans in the immediate future to develop it at all. And so the city can want to add residential in different parts of the city all they want. It doesn't matter if the owner of that property, you know, decides not to develop it, or vice versa. The owner could want to do something with it and the city could decide that's not where they want to locate it. So there's a lot of factors over which the school districts have absolutely no control whatsoever. And really we are at the whim of allowing that process to take place, allowing the jurisdictions that have purview to that process to take place, and then figuring out how we respond to it accordingly.
And I think the basic question I heard was, would development affect enrollment? In other words, increase it by enrollment?
It was really both. It was both funding and enrollment.
Well, enrollment, the funding, you know, not basic aid kind of, but, you know, so again, going back to Lori's point, if it did, and whether it be Valco or anything that might be on a horizon with RENA or whatever, there's not going to be a big development in Saratoga. Period.
So
there's not going to be a big development in Los Altos where the school is. So that just that's not going to help. It's not going to help the problem of distribution of students within schools that you still got to deal with.
I'm going to push us along to just another quick topic here, which is really, we all know what Prop 13 was from years ago. We just passed Prop 19. Prop 19 last November, which allowed homeowners 55 and older to move and retain their property, their Prop 13 property tax base. So I bring this one up because Cupertino has an aging population. That's the reason we've got declining enrollment. We have Prop 13, which incentivized many homeowners to just stay put. Now we have Prop 19, which is an incentive to move them along. I'll start with Stacy on this one. Is that something that you're considering in your financial projections? Do you see now more turnover coming as a result of Prop 19? Does it factor into your calculations?
We do. We work closely with our demographer, and you know they're fairly conservative, but they do give the outlook for the next 10 years and take into account. I think one of the biggest pieces is even with the development, we are seeing our young students, the rate of birth is just declining drastically in our area. And so as families are moving in, they're still moving in with older children or no children at all. So it just complicates the whole complex of it, because there's not the money coming in, there's not the children coming in. And so, you know, for our forecast, we take a very conservative view because we need to plan for that way.
So, and Stacy, Tracy, sorry, the other thing that's really driving this is it's not property tax, it's capital gains, it's income tax. So
it's kind of both.
Well, no, it's there's nothing, there's only one thing you can do about that, and that's to have one of the partners die and
yes.
Up. But there are definitely people, I mean, if you bought your house a long time ago and now it's worth $2 million, you know, you pick 500,000 out of that and you've got $1.5 million of capital gains that you're going to get hit between state and federal at a, you know, 30.
I as an example, I live in a state where everybody's kids are grown and gone. There are several households where first spouse has passed away and they're in exactly the zone where they're not going to move unless, because they've got a great property tax base. They have a home way too big. They're just not going to move. Let me keep on going. We did get a question, and I plan to ask it anyway, and that is, there was quite a buzz about a square foot tax not so long ago. You've gone with a parcel tax, and many have advocated that a square foot tax is a more equitable tax. So why not? And maybe Stacy, again, I'll do the triumphant here, Stacy, Phyllis, Lori, whoever would like to, why not pursue a square foot tax?
So we did do a deep consideration of both the square foot and the flat rate when we were exploring the parcel tax. And, you know, I think from our community, we heard from both sides, you know, the support of the square foot and the support of the flat rate. We really looked at our past success has really been with a flat rate. And, you know, again, when we put this measure out, our hope, our desire is to get it passed. And so we were weighing all the different formulas of how best to achieve that. When we started to look at the square foot, we know that there has been some districts that did put a square footage on. We know that there has been some legal after facts when school districts do the square footage, and it does get tied up. And I think we just didn't want to take that risk at this time. Again, it was important to get the tax passed. And so we thought our best chances was with that flat rate. Not to say that we wouldn't come back in later years and explore a square foot, because I think there is some interest out there still. But at this point, we just wanted to go with what we felt was safer and more reliable to get passed.
And I think Stacy hit on some of the highlights of our reasoning. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is Public Policy Institute of California does not agree that that's a more equitable taxing strategy. And in fact, the research says that it is not a more equitable way of assigning a parcel tax. And particularly in the case of school districts where state law does not allow us to offer a variable rate based on use type. And so because we cannot designate a different rate, a variable rate for residential generating or student generating properties versus commercial properties, et cetera, there's a lot of work still to be done at a state level policy level to adjust Ed Code and to adjust our state laws around ways in which perhaps in the future square foot could be a more equitable way, but is not right now. So I think that's the one other thing that when you really start to dig in there, I know there are some popular examples of districts and some other places in the state who have square foot models, but I think their conditions are very different. The sizes of their school district are very different than ours, where a relatively modest square foot price can generate thousands of dollars per student. Berkeley's square foot parcel tax generates something like $5,000 a student. Some of the North Bay, Kentfield, places like that, they're generating $2,000 and $3,000 a student off their square foot parcel tax because they can have a very small per square foot that has a very big impact because they're such smaller districts. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about the reasons why a square foot district, a square foot parcel tax is or isn't more equitable, and what that would mean in our use case as opposed to just because it exists as a use case.
Can I don't mean to distill it, to unduly oversimplify it, but can I walk away thinking that would it be fair to say you considered it, you needed the tax to pass, and you were concerned this was a bridge too far for the community to shift from thinking about parcel taxes to a square foot tax? Is that, I don't want to unduly simplify it, but I think that's what I'm hearing. That's the reason.
You're spot on. I think you're spot on.
Okay.
And I can just add to that really quickly to say that we did a tremendous amount of research on this. We did a number of surveys and we really looked at the voting population. Ours is bigger a voting population than CUSD has, but over and over and over again, it failed. And let's remember that when we're passing a parcel tax, the threshold is so high. I mean, we really have to pass it at this huge level where it's very hard to get 2/3 of the community or anywhere to agree. We can't have something that's controversial and have hopes that it will move forward.
And it is responsibility of a board, of a governing board, to make sure that they don't waste, district money. They make sure that whatever they decide to do, it has a very, very good chance of passing. A board cannot take risk, like personal. They can say, I want to take personal risk, but they are responsible for public money. They cannot take risk.
I'm going to shift to actual declining enrollment as a specific topic. We did get one question. It's very simply written. It says, how does Measure A address declining enrollment? I'm going to answer it by saying it doesn't really address declining enrollment. It is really about finding funding for the school district. So if you'd like to, I'm doing this in an interest of moving us along, but if you'd like to change my answer, please do. Okay, very good.
Actually, Tracy, I want to add to you that, you talk about RENA, it's a 10-year, it's up to 2031. We're not going to bring kids in the next 5 years. So it really is not about
this question was really about, does Measure A do anything on it?
So the Measure A really is to help the district.
Okay, financially.
Move along.
So no, Stacy, Lori, Phyllis, how will you engage the community in crafting a solution to address declining enrollment, and when can we expect to see a plan?
Again, I think our conversations, we are waiting after the May 4th for the Parcel Tax. Declining enrollment will be the conversation as we navigate through these next 2 years with our COVID and the impact. And we would, in all likelihood, recreate our Citizen Advisory Committee so that we do have the input from our community, work closely with them. I think lessons learned throughout the years here as we've navigated through and we've done our cuts and we've tried many, many different attempts is the communication and to ensure that we are fully engaging and involving our community in those conversations. I think it's always a lesson learned for us when we feel like we're communicating and we shared that information to really do that over and over again, because the one thing learned as we look back in retrospect in the fall, as uncomfortable as those conversations were about closing schools or consolidating schools and declining enrollment, it did engage and involve a lot of our community members that we hadn't been able to connect with before. And so I think that's been a really important, and so that would be a lesson learned as we move forward and continue the discussions in the declining enrollment, is to ensure that the involvement is there.
I'm going to let everybody know we're probably going to go 5 minutes long because I have 4 more questions I would love to get out here. So we kind of have known since 2014 we have a problem. We've been moving forward, thinking about it, recognize it's very difficult. As we reflect on the last 7 years, what have we learned? What are the lessons learned that we're going to bring forward as we craft a solution? Don't everybody jump on this at once.
I will jump in first. And again, haven't been in the district the entire 7 years, but certainly have learned in my various roles here and been heavily involved throughout the process as our committees were formed, is I really do think it's about engaging the community. We have many challenges. We cover 6 cities. And so there's 6 different unities that we really have to work together with. And it really is bringing everyone together because, parents care about their child's school. And we really need to engage and realize that what affects one school affects our entire district. And I think that's been missing in the years past, is that the feeling of what happens to my school happens in isolation. And it really does have a compounded effect. And so it's that communication across the entire district and learning forward. How do we pull all those pieces together? I think that's one of the biggest learning factors in moving forward.
I think the previous superintendent, he had some ideas about dealing with these issues, but I think he was overly optimistic about the results in many of the cases that he tried. And so maybe we learn to be more realistic moving forward, I would say, hopefully.
So you know what I would say lesson learned is early communication, continuous education. People are asking now, how is CUSD funded? They should have known this years ago. How was CUSD funded? How is school district funded? So that continuous outreach in the community, not just parents, but community members, and then get them involved and get them be knowledgeable so that things are not a surprise. Because everything is that, I don't know about this. This is new, like there's no transparency. Even though it's in your website, it's you know, in the news, but people really are busy with their lives. They raise their kids, go to work, they have fun. They're not interested, or so attract their interest. Early education, continues community outreach, continuous education. I think that's what we really need to learn together as a community.
Yeah, I shouldn't be answering the question, but my distillation on this is we knew it was a problem. It is a problem. And we know how hard it is to change folks around school, the number of schools and where they're located. And it is, Hung, what you have said, it is a ongoing, endless exercise of community engagement. That's, as I've talked to people in preparing for this, that was my lesson learned. And certainly the information I learned about school funding and how underfunded CUSD was, not financially mismanaged, but underfunded it has been. And considering how powerful our parents are in their passion for their students' education, just think about what could be accomplished with substantially higher funding in our schools. It just could be quite extraordinary. Not that it isn't, but there's lots more to go.
Tracy, can I add one last thing to that? Is education. I think there's still a lot of community education that needs to happen too. Even
oh yeah, that's what I meant.
Has happened. I
outreach.
think it's still, you know, we have some parents who are certainly have become more engaged over the past year. But there's still a long way to go. You know, I sat in a meeting in 2014, since that's what you said, where I heard a former trustee, former president of the state board of it, former president of the State School Boards Association, Joe Lucy, who was a trustee in this district for many years, where she called this out and spot on said that this was coming for us. And I think had the wider community heard her comments that night and really come to understand them and the long-term implications of what that was going to mean for this school district, we all would have been better for it. But there's not necessarily always an interest in that community education piece clicking and taking hold.
Two more questions I got to get to it, but I can't withhold my comment on this. Much of the school board is new. Stacy, you are new. You should own that newness and just say, we're not going to do what we did the last 7 years. You know, we're going to flood you with information, because having had that, in many ways, you could think the last 7 years has been squandered in that change management with the community because they didn't understand these things. And so it's something I think everybody in an elected office needs to own and embrace. But this question is specifically for Lori and Phyllis. Why should the community have confidence that the funds from Measure A will be well spent?
Go ahead, Phyllis.
Oh, well, I was just going to say we discussed it a lot in board meetings. We had a lot of public comment around how the money should be used. It's pretty specifically stated in our ballot statement how we're going to spend the money. And I think our track record is pretty good. I think the bond money and the parcel tax money that we've had in the past, we have spent as we promised the voters, and we will definitely continue to do that. So I think our past performance hopefully will instill confidence in the voters.
So I'm going to answer this one by saying there was a time where I myself spent many years questioning the transparency and the budget and what was going on in this district. And I think as I became more involved and became more educated about it, what I've learned is that this is actually an exquisitely well-managed district. To be able to function at the level that this district does, as a top performing district, not just in the region, not just in the state, but in the country, in the bottom 2% of funding in a state that is already low funded compared to the rest of the country is truly remarkable. And it's something that this community should be extraordinarily proud of. And so this notion that somehow this isn't a well-managed district, or that this is a district that isn't functioning at an exquisitely high level of fiscal responsibility is unfortunate, because it's simply not true. The more time that I have come to understand our budget, to understand deeply how broken school funding is in California, and that CUSD is the loser amongst the loser in that formula and in that system, really just highlights how well managed with the funds we do have this district is. And so I think that in and of itself should give voters confidence to be able to give this district the money that it's identified that it needs to continue to create a stable budget and a stable environment for optimal learning to continue to take place for this community's children, right? The promise that we make for public education is for every child in this community. And that is who we are as part of our identity here in CUSD.
I've got one more question for Stacy, and then at the end, I would like Stacy to let people know where they can get more information, but I'll ask you that after this next question. Okay, last question to you, the last really informational question about this. And I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. So enrollment is declining. So we are naturally shrinking into an enrollment size that's going to fit our budget. We see that in the charts. Our funding per pupil is going to go up. And yet you're asking for a parcel tax. Won't that just delay solving our problem, which is naturally going to go away anyway? So why should parents and non-parents vote yes on Measure A?
I would say vote yes on A, because it really is fixing our problem in a long term, because we may shift into the community funded at some point in the upcoming years. We will be one of those that are barely a basic aid district. We really do need to have this stability now to be able to offer the programs. It's not going to fix our declining enrollment. We will have to continue to deal with declining enrollment. We can look at other sources of the revenue on our sites as we lease out, but this parcel tax really does help us meet our need. Again, we're facing 2 years without salary increases, and looking ahead into our budget, we're facing another 8 years without anything built into it. And so I think this parcel tax really does ensure offering the programs, the resources that we know that we need our students to do. There is no other fix. The declining enrollment is not going to fix that. Our kids don't come in those neat little packages that we can fill each campus equitably. There are so many other factors that go into place. And so just because we're in declining enrollment, we may shift into the community funded, doesn't necessarily fix our problem. We still are going to have to look at how do we provide that equitable, robust education for all.
Thank you. We got several questions on where to find more information on funding. I think, Polly, that was really related to the information that you provided, as well as just general information on Measure A and all things CUSD. So I don't know if there can be a link on your website that could take people to all this information. We will certainly post this recording on our website for League of Women Voters Cupertino-Sunnyvale, as well as our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find it there, but I'd suggest, if possible, that maybe CUSD put an easy link on their landing page, if possible.
We will.
That's really it. I want to thank all the panelists very much, and those that have hung in 7 minutes too long. And Pam, if we can just bring up the last couple slides, that would be great. So I do want to thank all of the panelists. More importantly, I want to thank all of our attendees for hanging with us through this whole presentation. And just one commercial more on the next slide for voting. Remember, it is May 4th, 2 ways to vote, both by mail or putting it in a drop box. And we love saying this, got to be present to win. So please vote. Thank you all very, very much.